After several weeks of delving into hobbies, we finally finished that massive stack of folders, opened up another box, and found some really interesting folders of subjects to delve into over the coming weeks. The first two are on racing. The first folder we'll dive into today is speedboat racing, or I guess it kind of evolved into just boat racing in general in the 1950s. And then I've got another one for next week on motorcycle racing. Haven't opened that one up yet. But this one's on speedboat racing, including a couple of kind of wild and woolly boat races in the early 1950s that just lasted for a few years, but were pretty crazy. So let's dive into that. This week's episode on speedboat racing. But before we dive into this week's episode, I'd like to ask you, please hit the bell to subscribe, hit the button to like, and by all means, leave a comment, especially if you or anyone you know or a family member was involved in boat racing or anything kind of strange and unusual to do with boats. The comments, I love hearing, especially from family members, descendants that were featured in the years past by Strange As It Seems. But your engagement goes a long way to helping me bring this brand, 100-year-old iconic brand, back for the digital age. Welcome back. This is Jeff Hicks, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hicks, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. And for the first story on today's episode on boat racing, we go all the way back to 1928. Looks like right when John Hicks was starting the comic strip, he pulled this out of Popular Science Monthly about water flivvering. It was a new national sport, flivvering, what a great word, but dashing along at a speed of more than 30 miles an hour. Crazy. But there was Kirk Ames with this 14-foot Class C baby whale. I guess there was a 133-mile Albany, New York race down the Hudson. Took over 4 hours, almost 5 hours. But I guess it was just kind of starting. I saw that in this article. Outboard cylinders were produced, piston displacement enlarged, costly alloys replaced. So I guess the late 1920s, early 1930s is when really technology allowed for kind of boat racing and speedboat racing to begin. But the first fact is Malcolm Pope. I guess he was 18 years old at the time. He jumped 35 feet in an outboard motorboat. This is Winter Haven, Florida, back in 1928, but featured in 1931. And then in 1932, we have Charles Cabot, who won a 132-mile motorboat race. The entire race was 132 miles, and he won it by 1 second. Crazy. Charles Cabot of New Haven raced his homemade outboard motorboat over the finish line of the annual Albany, New York race on the Hudson River, just 1 second ahead of Kenneth McKenzie. Cabot made the 132-mile run at an average speed of 44. So here we are a year later, all the way up to 44.4 miles per hour. Strange as it seems, every winner of the annual race has broken the record. The race was started in 1928, has been conducted ever since then. The winner of the 1928 race averaged 29.8 miles per hour. The three first boats in the 1932 race made the run in less time than the winner of the 1931 Outboard Classic of the Hudson. And a great picture here of Charles Cabot with his trophy, victory by a tick in a classic motorboat race. And moving on into the late 1930s and early 1940s, here's a motorboat madman here, Mortimer Auerbach of Miami. He broke 5 international speedboat records in 3 hours. This is on April 2nd, 1939. There's a great photograph there of Mortimer and his Emancipator 7 speedboat. Cool looking boat there. Really interesting. Tons of articles here. Record smashing speedboat sets 5 marks in one day. That's Popular Mechanics there, I think, from 1939. Pretty cool. Got a article on the back on titanium oxide, the strongest and whitest pigment known. Produced from a black ore. Interesting. Veritable miracle of chemistry. I love these old magazine articles. And then, of course, I also love the city of Miami, Florida. I love they call it dope. Funny enough, I look at all these notes here and here's the dope on this story, or the dope on that story, is that kind of 1940s lingo. But there was always really interesting dope on the stories here, and this is information and pictures you wished on Mr. Auerbach. Hope it meets your approval and is exactly what you want. Come on over. As always, Ted Ramsey from the city of Miami, Florida, and I guess Ted was the one who kind of authenticated all of this and sent the information on Mortimer, and then it looks like we featured him again. John Hicks did. Mortimer Auerbach. This is 1942, August 31st. Famed speedboat ace won his first race with a second-hand boat bought through a newspaper classified ad. So although this was 1942, it went all the way back to 1933. But that's that Emancipator 7 boat again. But apparently his first race, he won it with a second-hand boat bought through a newspaper classified ad, and I guess he's won dozens of regattas at this point, taken dozens of cups, threw away his chances for a 1940 championship by stopping to save a fellow speedster from drowning in the middle of a race. So not only a champion, but also a great sportsman, the amazing Mortimer Auerbach. And moving a little, here's another one from 1942. This is a cool photograph of Bob Eastman, Cypress Gardens, Florida. There's going to be another story or two coming there. I guess this was a place for all kinds of boating spectacles, but this is an overland speedboat. Bob Eastman of Cypress Gardens jumps his outboard motorboat over 40 feet of land, and now we're up to 60 miles an hour. What a great photo that is. Jumping it there, and of course I love these. The flowers of the Old South are enchanting the year round at Florida Cypress Gardens. So Cypress Gardens and the Cypress Gardens Association verifying the fact, the dope as it was on that fact. And I love this one. This is a true strange as it seems story here. George Guy, crazy. I guess when his motorboat hit a wave, turned over during a race, he was thrown. George Guy was 6 feet into the air. The boat righted itself, and Guy dropped back into the boat in the proper position behind the wheel. Crazy. And then he came in second in the race. This was Jackson, Georgia, September 8th of 1940. And there's the photograph of George Guy in action, and pretty cool too. This guy's from Greenville, South Carolina, and I love this. I didn't realize this until I started researching. I didn't even know, my father didn't know much about his family or where they were from, but as it turns out, John Hicks and his brother Ernest Hicks grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, which is pretty amazing. Here's I love these old stamps too, but a letter from Tom Carpenter on George Guy, and I love this in here. It says, John Hicks, author of the famous Strange as It Seems cartoon, with whom I used to jump around in George Mackey's gymnastic classes at the YMCA years ago, writes me to verify the freakish happening to a Greenville motorboat driver in a race stage several weeks ago at Jackson, Georgia. But this was the verification by Sue McLean. Of course the corroborating letter and dope from the Greenville Chamber of Commerce with a little tie-in to John Hicks. All right, we'll skip the Ernest Hicks era. It doesn't seem to be anything from 1944 to 48 when Ernest Hicks ran the comic strip. He took over when John Hicks died in 1944 on D-Day, strange as it seems. Had nothing to do with the war. He died of myocarditis, I guess, inflammation of the heart. And then my grandfather died in 1948 in a plane crash, small plane crash. And then my grandmother Elsie took it over. So in the 1950s, we kind of move into the Elsie Hicks era. And she had some stories here on boating in general. I think she moved into kind of other types of boats here in the mid 1950s. But here's a story of Kenny Stallman, 9-year-old veteran of 20 outboard motorboat races. He won 5 out of 7 starts in the 1950 racing season. The youngest competitor to him was twice his age, so pretty extraordinary kid. And I love this. Here's the story corroborating. Yes, Kennedy was 9 years old when racing during the 1950 season. And it says, sincerely, Kenny's dad. I love that in a handwritten letter from Eddie Stallman about his son. But really cool. 9-year-old, and his boat, I guess, was named Poor Kid. We got a couple of wild and woolly races here. These are amazing with tons of photographs. They both came out in 1951. Crazy races. We'll start with the Wind River Canyon Boat Race. This was held each Memorial Day over a 12-mile stretch of jagged rocks and whirling rapids. It's on the Wind River near Thermopolis, Wyoming. Contestants, 18 years or over, use, quote, anything that floats propelled by oars or poles. So this is actually not really motorboats per se, but just the Wind River Canyon race. And as it turns out, I guess they didn't realize it at the time, but a dam was built, as I looked this up later. And this is really the last. It just ran through about 1951. And then in 1952, they built the dam, which sort of ended all this whitewater rafting. But here's some great photographs. Here's the starting point of the race. And then I've got a picture of the top 3 winners. Here is Bob Ehrman. He was the winner of the 1951 Wind River Canyon boat race. And then I also have pictures in here of the 2nd and 3rd place winners as well. Awesome photographs of this and some really cool newspaper articles as well. Looks like a race for the River Wild Men. You got to be lucky, cocksure, and a little bit crazy to win this mad chase through the wildest water in the West. Crazy. And oh, this is awesome too. How about this? The Thermopolis Independent Record from 1951. I guess it was the 4th annual and probably the last one when they built the dam. I think the dam was built, as I looked it up, in 1952. So kind of a cool little capture moment in time on a wild and woolly race in the Wind River Canyon. And speaking of wild and woolly races, here's the craziest race on water. Another race that, was going on in 1951 that I guess by the late 1950s when water skiing and all that kind of took over, it sort of calmed down. But this was the annual Outboard steeplechase race held on Lake Eloise in Winter Haven, Florida. Participants pilot their boats over inclined ramps, bridges, through masses of weeds, blazing gasoline, and they finish the race by sliding their boats up and out of the lake. And look, check this out. There's a whole stack of photographs here. Here's the Mercury Kid in pear shape flying through the air. We got a boat here called Lightning, jump in the wake. Look at that. Look how high this guy is getting. Crazy, just flying through these cypress trees. I mean, this is amazing. Here's a guy that crashed, I guess, into the cypress trees. Guys flying over the land here. Another one with a tree, with a boat stuck way up in a cypress tree. That looked like absolute nuts. Crazy. The annual Outboard steeplechase race, Lake Eloise, Winter Haven, Florida. And then looks like my Grandma Elsie threw about 3 more stories here from the mid-50s. That was it for motorboat racing. But here's interesting fact. This looks like 1954. The Inthas of southern Burma, using a backward kick with one leg around the paddle, they propel their boats with lightning speed. So I guess they wrap their foot. Pile dwellers on Inle Lake in the southern Shan states of Burma. Only rowers in the world who make direct use of the leg drive, about which every coach on the bank of the Thames, the Cam, and the Isis shout themselves hoarse each year. Balanced on one leg, they twist the other around their 6-foot paddle, and with a backward kick propel the canoe at an astonishing pace. I guess there was a photo in here, but I guess it had to be returned. But crazy. The Inthas of southern Burma. And then we've got the Danish kayak rowers. This is also, I guess this is 1955. They've won 36 world championships and medals since 1948. So I guess these Danish-built kayaks were all the rage, right? So built to win. International kayak rowers have their eyes on Danish-built craft, in which 36 world championships and medals have been won since 1948. And then the final one here, it looks like some great genes here. John Robert Pierce of Toronto, Canada, 19 years old, winner of the Olympic single sculling trials. He's the son of Commander Henry Bob Pierce, and I guess he was really famous. 2-time Olympic winner for Australia back in 1928 and 1932, and grandson of the 7 times pro champion sculler of Australia, and that was 1901 to 1914, and great-grandson of pro champion sculler of Australia, 1875. So this guy's like a 4th generation, but the real famous, I think one was H.R. Pierce. And here's a handwritten letter from him. I guess he was really proud of his son, although, he was quite, Bob Pierce, I think, retired from the Royal Canadian Navy. He was a real famous sculler in the Olympics in kind of the late 1920s, early 1930s. But he's got the thumbnail sketch here on his great-grandfather, grandfather, and father, family of scullers. And as always, I love these. The original letter sent by Elsie to H.R. Pierce, and then a handwritten letter from Bob Pierce, the great Olympic sculler, back to my Grandma Elsie. Sent the original letter back with a handwritten note below. Well, that wraps up this week's episode on speedboat racing and boat racing in general. If you like content like this, old comic strips, strange, unusual facts from history, please hit the bell to subscribe, hit the button to like, definitely leave a comment. Your engagement goes a long way in helping me bring this 100-year-old brand back for the digital age. And I'll leave you, as I always do, with the quote from John Hicks's first book in 1928 when he was first launching As Strange as It Seems. And in the foreword he writes, "The author launches this book of the curious in nature and humankind on the vast sea of public opinion with the hope that it will fulfill its mission to entertain and acquaint its readers with some of the marvels of the world in which we live."